Yes, thank you very much to the order for your kind invitation. I'm very pleased and honored to be with you this morning in Vienna and to discuss this issue. It is indeed an important issue, also for Austria, where you had a decision from your constitutional court that is quite problematic and goes quite far if we consider the authority of judges in regard to the law. But I will not comment now this decision. I have been asked to give you an understanding of euthanasia within the framework of transhumanism, within this framework. So how to understand euthanasia, and I would say how did European states and also the European Court of Human Rights that is in Strasbourg arrived to this situation to recognize a kind of right to assisted suicide and sometimes to euthanasia. What has changed in our societies, in our culture, so that since about 10 years, in the last 10 years, a number of states, and above all, the European Court of Human Rights, based in Strasbourg, are now affirming that there is such a right to decide when and how to die. The Court of Strasbourg, that you know was founded after the Second World War, in a time when euthanasia was absolute evil, now recognize a right to decide when and how to die, a right not to be maintained in life, and even a right to stop, a right for the states to stop the feeding of persons who are lost conscience, who are in the coma. So in the last years, within my functions in Strasbourg, I have worked on many cases before the European Court of Human Rights, including a famous French case which is named Lambert case. It was in 2015, 6 years ago, when the Court of Human Rights really accepted that a state deprived a person from feeding and water, and accepted that a person would be left to die without considering the primacy of the right to life and without considering the circumstances of the death, because a death by denutrition is something very hard. And the court just said, okay, the states can deprive persons from such life support treatments or support. So how did we arrive to this situation? It is clear that those issues are highly political, highly philosophical. Within the European Court of Human Rights, each time we have a case related to euthanasia, it is like for other topics, similar topics like abortion, highly sensitive cases, highly philosophical case. And we know that the choice made by the judges is not a choice primarily legal, based on law, but it is a philosophical choice. It is even more, we can say, a spiritual choice. So when we speak about euthanasia, we shall not limit ourselves to a reasoning based on law, to a legal reasoning. We shall consider this issue much more broadly, because it is a more deeper question, and this question relies to our relationship between to our vision of the relationship between the body and the spiritual dimension of the human being. So the main question at the foundation of the issue of euthanasia is the relationship between the body and the spiritual dimension of the human being, which is, for the atheist, only the will. So, relationship between the body and the will, and for the believers, which is also the soul. So this is the only question of euthanasia, the nature of this relationship. It is an absolutely important question for our anthropology. It is really a fundamental aspect of anthropology. It determines anthropology. And as a consequence, it determines our understanding of our rights. It determines our vision of practices like abortion or euthanasia or other practices that implement the domination of the will over the body. So if there is one sentence that I think is important from my speech, it is the following, the domination of the will over the body. It is based on a dualist understanding of the human being, which separates and opposes the body, the matter, and the spirit, the will. So this is the foundation of the problem. How do we consider the relationship between the body and the soul, or the body and the will? Do we consider human beings as being unified? Or do we consider human beings as being separated, as being the association of two dimensions? Do we consider them unified and in harmony, or do we consider them as a dual beings with a separation, a division, and even an opposition between the body and the soul? So this is really the issue of euthanasia, but it is also the issue of abortion. It is also the issue of many practices like change of sex today, when people decide to change their sexual identity. It is always the idea that the will of the person has a right over the body of the person. The will of the woman, pregnant woman, has a right over her body. But this right is more the expression of a power, of a domination. It is not a right to do the good, like in, we could say, natural law. It is the expression of a domination. It is a power. A power. Very different from right based on justice. There is no issue of justice in abortion or euthanasia or change sex. It is just an issue of power. I have the subjective right on myself. My will has a right on my body. We can even say more, my will has a right against my body. And if I dominate my body, I express my domination, my power, and I express, in some extent, the domination of the will over the matter. And so this is clearly a dualistic understanding of the human being, of the anthropology. This dualistic understanding of the human being is opposed, we can say, to the harmonious understanding of the human being that considers human being as being together an incarnated soul, a soul within a body, but that cannot be separated. So this dualistic anthropology has a long history. It has always been present in the human thinking, and we can find it with Plato, for example, so already in the ancient time and philosophy. And it is still present today, and we can say it is very present today. In the past of the history, it was expressed by all the Gnostic tradition. And in the 1800s and 1900s, moreover, after Darwin, it found a new strength with Darwinism. Why did it find a new strength with Darwinism? Before Darwin, this dualist approach was mainly transmitted by the Gnostic tradition, which was a purely philosophical tradition. With Darwin theories gave a pseudo-scientific basement to the dualistic understanding of the human being. Because Darwin said that, and also the followers of Darwin, we may say, like Thomas Haeckel, like Thomas Huxley, or Ernst Haeckel in Germany, so the close followers of Darwin, or Spencer, said that life and matter are two different things, which is true. But they said the human being, is the result of the phenomenon of emergence of the spirit from the matter. They say life came from the matter, and the spirit came from life. So they see the human being as a process of emergence from the matter. And the more you are dominating the matter, the more you distance yourself from the matter, the more you are evolved, and the more you are human. So the Darwinists kept this idea of dualism because they consider the human being as a spirit within a matter, and they provide a scientific ground saying it is proven by science that there are two aspects in the human being, and that the human beings are humans because they have a spirit, and the more they have a spirit, the more they are human, and the more the spirit dominates the matter, which is the body, the more they are human. So for them, humanity is not, we could say, the harmonious accomplishment of our human nature that we receive at birth from nature or from God, from our Creator. It is not the harmonious accomplishment of the human nature that we implement and receive and accomplish, but it is the expression of strength, power, domination of the will over the matter, of the spirit over the matter. And the more the spirit is strong, the more the spirit dominates, the more the spirit goes against nature, against what is received at birth, we can say nature, what is received at birth, the more the people express and is elevated in humanity. So this is the philosophical background of euthanasia. The followers of the close followers of Darwin, especially Thomas Huxley, who was his publisher, and Ernst Haeckel in Germany, who was a biologist and a philosopher, also were the first ones at the end of the 1800s, especially Ernst Haeckel, who reintroduced the issue of euthanasia. How did they reintroduce this issue? They said, with the social Darwinists, that the society must dominate the matter. If we want to be a human society, we must dominate the matter, we must dominate the bodies, we must accompany the evolution of the human beings, of the human beings, and therefore, if we consider that only the will is human, because the body would be something that belongs to the matter, like the animals. If we consider that only the will is human, therefore the society, with the social Darwinists, must make any efforts to facilitate the life of the specimens, human specimens, who have a high degree of intelligence and will, and also may, for that, do the selection of people. So the idea of selecting people is a direct consequence of course, Darwinism. This selection of people, which is the idea to introduce an artificial selection to support natural selection. This idea of artificial selection is really the idea that we should control the material aspect of the humanity, which means the biological aspect of humanity, in order to facilitate the elevation of the human mind. And this directly, as we all know, contributed to this idea that an authority that is led by science shall control life as much as possible at any stage, at the beginning, but also later on, in order to facilitate the evolution and therefore to facilitate the humanization of the society. This is why someone like Ernst Haeckel was one of the first in Germany at the end of the 1800s to recommend euthanasia of people who do not have their full mind capacities. Those same people who introduced discourse in support of euthanasia also supported abortion. Birth control. So what is very clear at the beginning, at the end of the 1800s and the first 40 years of last century, what is very clear is that all the promoters of euthanasia were rooted into this atheist and evolutionist and dualistic vision of the human being. They were intellectually rooted as well with Huxley, Thomas Huxley, so the grandfather of Aldous, and Haeckel, Ernst Haeckel. They were the sons, the spiritual sons, the pupils of those people. And they were active for the control of life. So both active for birth control, but also the issues, of course, of racial marriage, the issues of immigration, and the issue of euthanasia. Because each time the purpose is the same, is to control as much as possible to the body of the people, to avoid procreation or maintenance in life of individuals who do not contribute to the elevation of our humanity through the elevation of the intellectual capacities over the body. So the same people who fight for birth control after a while engage themselves into the promotion of euthanasia. This is very clear when we look to the people who founded the first societies of promotion of euthanasia. For example, in the UK in 1935, the first people who founded this society for legalization of euthanasia were mainly members of the British Eugenics Society. So, in fact, the founders of this Association for Legalization of Euthanasia sent a letter to all the members of the Eugenics Society to invite them to join this new initiative. And as well, this new society in the UK was also composed largely of people who were active in the promotion of birth control in that time. So it is the same mindset, the same fight, the same objective for them at different level. As well, in the United States in 1938, also was funded a league, an American league for the legalization of euthanasia, and we find the same people who were in charge of eugenics, American Eugenics Society, but also the Malthusian League, but also the family planning, Planned Parenthood. And someone like Margaret Sanger, who founded the Planned Parenthood Association, explained very clearly that for her, the fight for euthanasia is the same as the fight for abortion. It is the control of life at the beginning and at the end. So it is the same mindset. So what happened? In 1938, so the American Association for Euthanasia was funded. Some of its members were very close as well with Germany programs, and even supported or gave advices for the programs of euthanasia implemented in Germany. So there were no intellectual separation between those American or British societies and what occurred in that time in Germany. Even the president of the American Society for Euthanasia, Mrs. Mitchell, very much welcomed what Germany has done in Poland over the child through euthanasia of handicapped children in Poland. And so we clearly see that there is no separation between those ideologies. It is the same ideology that was implemented. So we know that this program ended with the Second World War and with Nuremberg trials, which really provoked deep rejection of the discourse related to euthanasia. However, the philosophical grounded basement of euthanasia, this dualistic understanding of the human being, continued. The grandson of Thomas Huxley, so the publisher of Darwin, named Julian Huxley, who was a member of the eugenics societies before the war, member of the pro-euthanasia societies as well before the war, both in the UK and in the US. So Julian Huxley, the brother of Aldous, for example, after the war, he was not only the head of the Humanist International Federation, but he was also appointed the first director of the UNESCO in Paris in 1948. And he wrote articles saying that he hoped that one day eugenics will be once again accepted. And so he maintained his goal to promote eugenics after war, and so he was not the only one. The societies that did exist before the war, like the British Society, just changed their name after the war, and they took the name like Dying with Dignity or Exit, but they are the same societies that were founded before the war, just changed their name after the war to present better themselves. But so we have to understand that, yes, in 1945, 1948, with the Declaration, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and so on, people rejected euthanasia, but the promoters of this dualistic approach survived, of course. and their ideas continued within society, often under other names. In 1948, there has been a strong debate during the drafting of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in order to define what was the anthropology underpinning the declaration. So the choice between the two anthropologies, the dualist on one hand and the harmonious on the other, had again to be made and was discussed during the drafting of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Because the content of human rights depends on your choice. If you choose a dualist anthropology, you have rights of the will over the body, or against the body. If you choose harmonious anthropology, you have the principle of indisponibility of the body. I need to explain a bit more, maybe. Human rights depends on the definition of the humans. Depending on your definition of the humanity, you will have different rights. If you say that the humanity is the domination of the will, is within the will, if you say that human dignity consists in our ability to think, then you will promote the rights of the will, and at the end you will consider that the new principle of autonomy is the cornerstone of human rights. Because the domination of the will over the body is the basement of the right to autonomy, of the principle of autonomy. Because you say the will is the cornerstone, the individual will. With the harmonious anthropology, when you consider that the human being is naturally both a body and a soul together, then you consider that the human being has to flourish, has to accomplish his nature from birth to death. It is really a different vision. What does that mean to accomplish your human nature? It means that the purpose of life is not power, it's not the expression of the domination of your will. The purpose of life is bonheur, beatitude, we can say, yes. Beatitude because you accomplish your nature, what you receive at birth. It is two different visions. If now you look to human rights, the contents of human rights, the rights defined in 1948 are mainly rights that only protect the ability of every individual to accomplish his human nature. We don't provide for a right to fly in 1948. We just say, okay, the human being is a human being alive, so we protect the life. The human being is a social being, so we protect the ability to have relationships with a person, right to association, political rights. The human being is a spiritual being. We think, we pray, so we protect the abilities to search for the truth and to exchange ideas, freedom of expression, freedom of conscience. Human being prays, so we protect freedom of religion, so that a baby will be protected in his endeavor to accomplish his capacities, his natural capacities. The purpose of human rights in 1948 was to protect from the state the accomplishment of the natural capacities of the human beings. How to protect a child from a dangerous potential state in his life so that he can become mature, he can look for the truth, he can learn, he can be in good health, and so on. So this is the vision of human beings and of human rights, which we can say is harmonious. It protects the ability to accomplish our human nature. And one of the consequences of this harmonious understanding of human rights that prevailed in 1948 is that you don't have a right over your body, because you are one person. And so one of the consequences of this vision of human being is the prohibition of prostitution, for example, because it would go against dignity, because the dignity of the human being is this unity between body and soul, because we were created like that. And so if a person separates the body from the will, like prostitution, then you break the anthropology and you hurt dignity. Okay? It is the same reason why I cannot sell my arm, or piece of my body. This is the principle of indisponibility of the human body. It is the same principle that prevented from euthanasia or even killing or even suicide, or that goes against surrogacy. This principle of indisponibility. So we can see a coherent vision of human beings and human rights that leads and is aimed to happiness, is aimed to accomplishment, and at the end is aimed to beatitude, but not to power, just to accomplishment. Whereas if you change the anthropology, if you adopt the dualist anthropology, then you will break this unity between the body and the will, and you will say human rights are the support of the domination of the will over the body. And the first example, major example, was implemented with, of course, abortion, legalization, that said that women has the right to dispose on their own body. So we moved from the principle of indisponibility of the human body, and we affirmed the opposite right to dispose of your own body. So we can clearly see the full shift. And this right to dispose of your own body, made only of your will. In France, promoters of abortion always say, my will, my body. This is what people say, my will, my body. It's clearly expressed this separation. And it is the same logic that after a while leads to euthanasia, my will, my body. My will must dominate my body if I want to remain human. If my body dominates my will, I'm not human anymore. So if I am fully sick, if I am suffering, I'm not human anymore. If I am in coma, I'm not human anymore. And therefore, the expression of humanity would be to express a last domination of my will over my body through suicide, which would be the ultimate expression of the humanity, because it would be the ultimate expression of domination of the will over the body. And so this is why people can say that euthanasia is a way to protect human dignity, because it is a way to express at the end the domination of the will over the body. And if you consider that the will is, like Spencer said, the full expression of our humanity. And so this is how we moved to the current situation. Now the European Court of Human Rights adopted more and more the dualist vision of the human being, and introduced it into the case law, and therefore into the legislation. You can find in the book or elsewhere quotes from the European Court of Human Rights that are very explicit. For example, the European Court of Human Rights slowly changed its definition of the human dignity in order to associate human dignity with the principle of autonomy. The court also, and this is the way the judges change the interpretation of human rights, the court also facilitated introduction of euthanasia, on one hand using the precedent of abortion. So the court of Strasbourg said about France, the states have already allowed abortion. The Court of Human Rights granted to the states a certain freedom in doing so. Therefore, we give you the certain freedom regarding end of life as well. So it is really the same issue. And the Court of Strasbourg and this also managed to impose this way, this interpretation, through a redefinition of the right to life. Regarding euthanasia, the court said that the issue of euthanasia or assisted suicide does not depend on the right to life, shall not be considered under the scope of the right to life, but should be considered under the notion of quality of life. So we can see a phenomenon of subjectivization of the notions. The court departed itself from an objective notion, right to life, to preserve the biological life, and adopted another concept that is purely subjective, and said we must preserve and protect the quality of life. So this shift from an objective right, protecting something that we can touch, to a subjective right is a move that we observe on euthanasia, but also on other new rights introduced by the European Court of Human Rights, especially, we could say, the right that express each time the domination of the will over the body. And so the court said we must consider the issue of assisted suicide and euthanasia under the scope of the quality of life, and the quality of life is self-determined. So the individual will himself determine whether or not his life is of quality, is worth living, and it encompasses many aspects, including, of course, psychological aspects. So this is the way the court departed itself from the right to life and found a way to give a kind of legal basement to assisted suicide, creating a new notion, a new right within the existing right to privacy. So this may be, again, a bit complex, but the Court of Strasbourg and, in general, the Occidental jurisdictions creates those new rights to abortion, euthanasia, assisted suicide, change of sex, and so on, basing its reasoning on the right to privacy, right to protect, to respect of private life. Because in 1948, when the Universal Declaration was written, and afterwards the European Convention, we had objective rights. The right to life was something very concrete. The right to respect for private life was also something very concrete. It protected the persons from, the police getting into your house or from the state reading your letters. But the judges found within this right to respect for private life, using a case law from the US Supreme Court, the judges of Strasbourg found within this notion of privacy the origin of the new rights, the origin of the right to respect for autonomy, individual autonomy. So you can see that it's from a right that was aimed in 1950 to protect your home from the police, to protect your family from the government. From this objective right, the court created a whole new range of individual rights based on the principle of autonomy. And this principle of autonomy became now the new major reference of interpretation of human rights, and it is the source of new rights, such as the right to decide when and how to die, or other rights over your own body. Each time we see a kind of subjectivization of the right. So the right to life to the right to quality of life, but the same occurred on issues related to family or marriage. When the court said that now we shall not only protect the family, but we shall protect in general, family life, which is much broader and so on. So we see a subjectivization of the notion composing the human rights, and this subjectivization is also an expression of the idea, of the desire of the will to dominate and to redefine the material reality. So this is what I could tell you. Of course, this vision of domination of the will does not end with new rights that we can see today, because it is clearly a limitless vision. This vision considers that the process, they consider that the human beings are in a process of continuing evolution and progress, and they consider that the duty of the government is to facilitate and even accelerate this evolution and progress. So there is no limit to this phenomenon. The promotion of the right to die, of the assisted suicide, is just one example, one expression of the desire to control life. It is quite a basic way, a very basic way to control life, we want to end it. But it is driven by this desire to control life, today through euthanasia, and selection of human beings at birth or before birth, but tomorrow through other means, other technical means. So it is also interesting to see that it is as well Julian Huxley, so the grandson of Thomas Huxley, who is considered to be the first to really use the notion of transhumanism. So he said that his religion, in a book named Religion Without God, he says that his religion is transhumanism, which is this continuing process of evolution and control of the will over the matter. And so it is this we are in this situation. Clearly, we are still, if we look now more broadly worldwide, we are still in confrontation of anthropologies. Worldwide, many countries, many cultures do not accept the dualist anthropology. There are some cultures that are dualist, especially in Asia, but in other countries, in other continents, they don't accept this dualist anthropology. And so the fight is not over, but we can say that it is a difficult fight because on one hand the dualists promise power and domination, whereas the other ones, who are more the believers, just propose happiness and accomplishment. So it is two directions for the human beings and for the humanity, whereas we promote a kind of humility. We accept that we are what we are. We accept our human nature, and we just try to accomplish it and to be happy, to find happiness in our limits, in our human limits. And this was the purpose, I would say, of the human rights after war. Or we put the humanity into this kind of endless process of empowerment. But it does not lead at all to happiness. Empowerment just leads to division, inner division of the human being. It leads to a kind of schizophrenia, because the human experience, proves that dividing and opposing the body and the will or the soul, dividing and opposing the body and the soul, creates a lot of sufferings. Yes, it does create a lot of sufferings if you divide people. In some extent, it procures power. But this power causes sufferings. It is obvious regarding abortion. It is a power, but it does not provide beatitude, accomplishment, happiness. And regarding, I have another example, the issue of artificial procreation. In the 1980s and 90s, and even more recently, medical doctors and the society considered that it was good to conceive persons with anonymous gametes, donors, anonymous father, to conceive artificially persons with gamete donations, anonymous gamete donations. Because we had a dualistic understanding of the human being, and we considered that it was not important for someone to know who is his biological father. Because we consider that the matter, the body, is meaningless. Only the relationships are important to define the person. This was what we believed at that time. Now we see that the persons that were conceived with an anonymous father are suffering. Many of them, not all, but many of them are suffering. Even if they have parents, they need to know who is their father, biological father. And they fight to identify. So it proves that the division between the body and the identity and the soul creates very often sufferings. It's not natural. And there is a need to reunify the dimensions of our nature, the material and spiritual dimensions of our nature. And it is when we have this unity between the material and spiritual dimension of our humanity that we can be happy. And so, if I may say, I really believe that we have to choose between a power that procures capacities and sufferings, or a kind of humility that can procure simple happiness and accomplishment. Thank you.